The Deir Yassin Massacre. On the morning of April 9, 1948, fighters from the Irgun and Lehi paramilitary groups descended on the Arab village of Deir Yassin, just outside Jerusalem, and killed at least 107 civilians, though some estimates run considerably higher. The village had actually signed a non-aggression pact with its Jewish neighbors, which made the attack all the more shocking to those who witnessed the aftermath. Red Cross representative Jacques de Reynier arrived on the scene and documented mutilated bodies and evidence of summary executions. Jewish agency leadership publicly condemned the attack, but within years, the full scale of what happened was quietly buried in official Israeli historiography, with the village itself demolished and replaced by a new neighborhood. For decades, discussing Deir Yassin openly in Israel was considered politically toxic, and it took foreign scholars to fully excavate the documented record. The Lida and Romley expulsions. In the summer heat of July 1948, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 Palestinian civilians were forced out of the towns of Lida and Ramley on foot during Operation Dani, in what survivors called the Lida Death Mart. Hundreds died of thirst, exhaustion, and heat exposure along the road. Inside Lida, IDF soldiers shot and killed civilians sheltering in the Damash Mosque, with estimates of the dead ranging from 80 to over 400 depending on the source. The most remarkable part of the cover-up came years later when Yitzhak Rabin wrote candidly in his memoir about receiving the direct expulsion order, a passage Israeli military censors quietly cut before the book was published in 1979. The excise section only became public when the New York Times obtained and printed it, forcing an uncomfortable confrontation with a decision that official history had preferred to leave unnamed. The Kfar Qasim Massacre. On the evening of October 29, 1956, the same day Israel launched its invasion of Sinai as part of the Suez War, Israeli border police shot dead 49 Arab citizens of Israel returning home from work to the village of Kfar Qasim. A new curfew had been announced at 5 p.m., but the workers had no way of knowing, and soldiers had been explicitly ordered to shoot curfew violators regardless. The victims included women and children, all Israeli citizens. The government immediately imposed a military gag order that kept the massacre from public knowledge for months. When soldiers were eventually tried and convicted, the harshest sentence handed down was 17 years, quickly reduced to 3.5, and then the men were fully pardoned. The commanding officer responsible for the order, Colonel Shadmi, was fined 10 pruto, the smallest denomination of Israeli currency, a sum worth less than a cent, in what became one of the most grimly absurd legal outcomes in the country's history. The USS Liberty attack. On June 8, 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israeli aircraft and torpedo boats attacked the USS Liberty, an American Navy intelligence ship operating in international waters off the Sinai coast, for approximately 2 hours. 34 American sailors were killed and 171 were wounded, making it one of the deadliest attacks on a U.S. naval vessel since World War II. Israel maintained the attack was a case of mistaken identity, but surviving crew members disputed this emphatically, noting the ship was flying a clearly visible American flag in calm weather. NSA and naval inquiry documents related to the incident were classified for decades, and Liberty crew members reported being ordered not to speak publicly about what happened. A formal joint U.S.-Israel investigation was never conducted, and recordings later attributed to Israeli pilots suggesting they may have identified the ship as American remain a subject of fierce dispute to this day. The Sabra and Shatila massacre. Between September 16th and 18th, 1982, Lebanese Christian phalangist militias entered the Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camps in Beirut, while the camps were under the direct military control of the Israeli Defense Forces, and killed somewhere between 800 and 3,500 civilians over roughly 36 hours, with the death toll still disputed depending on the source. The IDF controlled all access points to the camps and fired illuminating flares through the night to help the militias see, while reports of the killings filtered up the chain of command and were reportedly ignored. Israel's own Kahan Commission, established after massive public protests in Israel itself, concluded in February 1983 that Defense Minister Ariel Sharon bore personal responsibility for not preventing the massacre. Sharon was removed as defense minister but remained in the cabinet, and he went on to serve as prime minister from 2001. The accountability that the commission's findings seemed to demand never fully materialized. The First Intifada, bone-breaking orders. When Palestinians rose up across the occupied West Bank and Gaza in December 1987, The Israeli government's response included a policy that Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin described publicly and without euphemism as breaking the bones of protesters, an order that soldiers carried out on young men and teenagers with clubs and rifle butts. Over roughly 4 years, approximately 1,100 Palestinians were killed during the First Intifada, with many more documented cases of extrajudicial beatings, arbitrary detention, and reported live burials. Military censorship actively blocked international press from publishing certain footage and reports from the occupied territories. The systematic suppression of documentation was serious enough that a group of Israeli lawyers and activists founded B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, in 1989, specifically because no independent body was tracking or publicizing what was happening on the ground. The Jenin refugee camp operation. In April 2002, during Operation Defensive Shield, the IDF launched an intense military assault on the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank, and in the immediate aftermath, Palestinian officials claimed that hundreds of civilians had been massacred. The United Nations assembled a fact-finding team to investigate. Israel refused to grant them access, and the team was formally disbanded before completing its inquiry, which itself became the central scandal of the entire episode. The final documented toll was approximately 52 Palestinians killed, the majority of them combatants according to Israeli figures, alongside 23 Israeli soldiers. Human Rights Watch later confirmed specific cases in which homes were demolished with residents still inside. The blocking of the UN investigation ensured that a full independent accounting of what happened in those narrow camp alleys, where bulldozers worked for days, was never completed. The Gallia family beach killing. On June 9, 2006, 7 members of the Gallia family were killed by an explosion on a beach in northern Gaza while they were on a family outing. A video of 10-year-old Huda Gallia running and screaming over her father's body circulated worldwide and became one of the defining images of that year. The IDF conducted an internal investigation in a matter of days and announced it was not responsible, attributing the explosion to a Palestinian landmine. Human Rights Watch military analyst Mark Garlasco examined shell fragments and crater evidence recovered from the scene and disputed the IDF's findings, pointing toward a 155mm artillery shell consistent with Israeli stockpiles. No independent investigators were given access to conduct their own forensic analysis, and the case was closed on Israel's terms, with no outside body able to verify or challenge the conclusion. Operation Cast Lead. White phosphorus. During Operation Cast Lead, which ran from late December 2008 through January 2009, the IDF used white phosphorus munitions over densely populated civilian areas in Gaza, including strikes near hospitals and crowded markets. White phosphorus creates a burning chemical reaction that cannot be extinguished with water and causes severe and deep tissue burns. Its use as a smokescreen is legal, but deploying it in urban civilian areas as a weapon is a violation of international humanitarian law. Israel denied using the substance at all, then acknowledged it but denied any misuse. On January 15, 2009, white phosphorus shells struck the United Nations headquarters in Gaza while it was sheltering civilians and storing humanitarian aid, prompting UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon to demand a full investigation. The Goldstone Report, released in September 2009, documented multiple violations. Israel refused to cooperate with the inquiry, and Richard Goldstone's later partial retraction of some findings, under circumstances that remain disputed, gave Israel the diplomatic opening to dismiss the report's broader conclusions entirely. The Mavi Marmara Flotilla killings. On May 31, 2010, Israeli naval commandos raided the Mavi Marmara, a Turkish vessel carrying humanitarian aid toward Gaza in international waters in the Mediterranean Sea. 10 activists were killed in total, 9 during the raid and 1 who died after 4 years in a coma, including 8 Turkish nationals and 1 Turkish-American dual citizen. Autopsies conducted in Turkey found that several of the victims had been shot multiple times, including gunshot wounds to the back of the head, suggesting close-range executions rather than defensive fire. Israel classified the full helmet cam footage recorded by its commandos and released only a selectively edited version designed to support the claim that soldiers acted in self-defense after being attacked with clubs and metal rods. The UN Palmer Report, published in 2011, described the killings as unacceptable and concluded that the degree of force used was excessive and unreasonable. Turkey recalled its ambassador and Israeli-Turkish diplomatic relations collapsed for years, with the selective release of footage remaining the clearest documented example of deliberate information control. The killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. On the morning of May 11, 2022, Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot in the head while reporting from Jenin in the occupied West Bank. She was wearing a clearly marked blue press vest and helmet. She was also an American citizen. Israel's initial response blamed Palestinian militant fire, a claim that quickly unraveled as independent investigations by the Associated Press, CNN, the United Nations, and ultimately the United States State Department all concluded that Israeli forces were almost certainly responsible. The State Department released its findings on July 4, 2022, characterizing the shooting as likely unintentional, but attributing it to an IDF bullet. Israel declined to open a criminal investigation, and no soldier was ever charged. Al Jazeera filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court. At her funeral in Jerusalem, Israeli police attacked pallbearers, nearly causing them to drop the coffin. An image that drew condemnation across the world and added a final, visible layer to an already documented pattern of impunity. The 2023 to 2024 Gaza campaign. Following Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack on southern Israel, which killed approximately 1,200 Israelis, Israel launched a military campaign in Gaza that by mid-2024 had resulted in over 35,000 Palestinian deaths according to Gaza's health ministry, a figure Israel disputed on methodological grounds. On April 1, 2024, an Israeli airstrike killed 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers in Gaza, including nationals from Australia, Poland, the United Kingdom, and a dual American-Canadian citizen, despite the organization having shared its convoy's GPS coordinates with the IDF in advance. Israel described it as a grave mistake. In May 2024, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan announced he was seeking arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on charges including the use of starvation as a method of warfare. Communications blackouts imposed during major ground operations repeatedly prevented independent journalists from verifying events in real time, and Israel maintained a near-total ban on foreign press entering Gaza independently, ensuring that much of what happened there was filtered through official military statements before the world could see it. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.